Hi, my name's Nerys, and I've just come to talk to you about adult nursing as a potential career pathway that some of you may be interested in. Anyway, I'll just start with how I came into nursing in the first place and where I'm currently working. So I did my training probably at what's regarded as a relatively older age of 25. Having chosen to do other things like voluntary work. I worked in the social care sector. I did a volunteer project and went to live abroad and things like that before actually starting my nurse training. Whilst I was at school, I'd completed A-levels and what was then O-levels. So way back in the kind of dark ages to some of you, but GCSEs now, as they're called, isn't it? So in terms of a pathway, in terms of academic requirements, that has by and large remained the same, in that you would be required to complete 5 GCSEs followed by either A-levels or an access to health type BTEC course. And then nursing now, of course, is a 3-year degree programme with then opportunities to go on and do a master's in all manner of different arenas of nursing. So on completion of the programme, I went first of all to work in burns intensive care. And in Swansea, we have Morrison Hospital, and within Morrison Hospital is the Southwest UK network for burn care for adults. So I spent the first 5 years of my working life as a nurse working within burns intensive care. So of course, that came with lots of challenges in terms of technical skills to start with, but as Susan and Evelyn were alluding to, everything seems to be underpinned really with these kind of compassion and things like that. You've got to have this passion for the job. You've got to have an ability to communicate with people, to sort of see the little things, isn't it? They seem to be important in any arena where it involves working with animals or people, isn't it? And the owners of the animals and things, or the carers of the animals, isn't it? So burns intensive care required long hours. It was very, very hot. It was demanding emotionally, physically. And of course, you're exposed to lots of, the other great theme I've noticed is bodily fluids. And within burn care, there's a lot of bodily fluids. So getting used to that kind of, the way things feel, the way things look, the way things smell as well. It's something to get used to really. And it's something that you need to examine in yourself, isn't it? And ask yourself the question, am I prepared for these kinds of things? Because they're the things that can take us by surprise, isn't it? So following then a spell on burns intensive care, I went to burns theatre. And again, there was a lot of challenges in terms of the heat. That this is something that's quite overlooked, that burns care is actually very, very hot. So a burns theatre on average was about 30, 31 degrees. And you might be there on your feet for sometimes, I think the longest I was there was 10 hours. So you need to be sort of physically prepared for the demands. Rather, you need to be prepared for the physical demands, isn't it, of working as a nurse in these different sort of arenas. That was followed then by burns outpatients, so completely different sort of environment again. So I went from the kind of highly skilled technical sort of elements of an intensive care environment to, again, the technical skill of theatre environment, to then the sort of working more closely and having prolonged periods of contact with patients come in for outpatients appointments and working with their families and carers and so on and so forth. You probably noticed that there's a bit of a theme in all of the nursing that I've done to date, because it all sat within burns and plastics surgery. So plastic surgery / plastics trauma, so any soft tissue damage really. And I spent another 6 years then working on the plastics trauma as a ward nurse, followed by plastics trauma again, but this time as a nurse practitioner, before going back to burns and working as a clinical nurse specialist. So the point being is that in the sort of 23 years that I've worked as a nurse, because now I've come into nurse education, the variety was great in that I was on the ward, I was in theatre, I was in an ITU environment, I was working as an outreach nurse, so that involved going to other hospitals, going into the prisons, and having opportunities then to do something different, starting up a prison project, and then eventually going towards the nurse education sort of pathway. So hopefully that slide just demonstrates the variety that you can have within or under the umbrella, isn't it, of adult nursing. I don't know how to change the slide, sorry. Do I? Oh, okay. So a typical day kind of demonstrated really by the nurse in the picture, because she's got, some of you will notice that she's actually got 6 arms, which is really just to try and show how you're juggling things, isn't it? Continuously trying to juggle the workload, work out what needs to be your priority. And this is where all of your skills come in, isn't it? Also, this is the bit that may not appeal to some of you, in that the typical day throughout my nursing career started at 7. So that involved obviously getting up at normally 5:30, and now the days are typically 12 to 13 hours long. So you'd start work at 7 a.m. and finish at 8 p.m. So this is something that is probably less appealing than some of the other careers that you might choose within healthcare or allied health, isn't it? However, if you have the passion for people and a passion for the job, that kind of thing is a bit of a checks and balances, isn't it? That it's a payback because of the rewards that you get within that working day. So it started at 7, and then depending on where I worked, so imagine on the ward, you have to administer the medications, you might be completing admissions, discharges, taking people to theatre, looking after people in post-theatre, and then in a more acute care setting, dealing with sort of deteriorating patients, so patients that require acute care in the here and now. And then other things, working with the families, going to multidisciplinary team meetings. Then you've got your fundamental nursing tasks like helping people bathe and shower and dress and eat, use the bathroom. So everything really that needs to happen is wound care, taking people to radiography appointments and things like that, and going to the ward round with the anaesthetist and the surgeon and the dietitians and the pharmacists and the physios and the OTs. So it's a whole array of people, isn't it? And you're an integral part of that wider team, really. Okay, sorry, yeah, forward. Yes, so it asked to kind of reflect really on what my favourite things about nursing are and have been for the sort of 23 years that I worked in these different environments. And I kind of chose all these pictures because everything about the job that I loved was the relationships that I had with the people that I worked with, and I include in that the patients themselves and their families and carers and friends. And when I look back on all of the things that make me smile when I think about it, it's not the sort of the technical things, it's all about the people. It was all about the people that I've met over the years and being able to make them feel a certain way, make them feel comfortable, make them feel confident that I'm going to be able to help them the best that I can. Because of course, a lot of the time when people are in hospital, they're very vulnerable, they're very afraid, they're very confused sometimes about things that may or may not happen. And during COVID, obviously, they were very isolated as well. And so favourite things for me have always been that relationship that you manage to build with the people that you work with. And outside of the sort of relationships with patients, families and carers, also the relationships with my colleagues, isn't it? So if I think of all the people that I've met over the years and the good friendships that I've made with different members of the MDT, isn't it? That always makes your working days so much better. So favourite things, definitely relationships with people and being able to be a part of somebody getting better, isn't it? Or helping people through their most difficult time. Okay, sorry, forward. I think the one that comes, oh yeah, least favourite things. So I kind of touched on this earlier, isn't it, when I discussed about starting work at 7. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day of the year, including Christmas, Easter, bank holidays. And this is a big thing to think about because there were times over the years when friends would be going off camping or surfing, and I couldn't go because I was working on the weekend, or I was working Christmas time and couldn't spend time with family and friends in the way that I would otherwise like to, isn't it? So it is a consideration. However, there's always the hope that what you do within the time that you're there is rewarding enough that you're prepared to put up with these long hours, demanding hours emotionally and physically, and that you're prepared to give up the holidays and the weekend. And it's tiring. It is tiring. That middle picture is supposed to be a picture of people who are tired, and working 13 hours and working night shifts is tiring, and you have to find ways of sort of mitigating that, really. And how do we sort of ensure, isn't it, that you're looking after yourself? Somebody mentioned earlier, I heard, you know, about the whole well-being of people, isn't it? It's not just the well-being of the people that we're caring for, it's our own well-being as well, isn't it? So least favourite things is working hours and tiredness, because they were big features really in my life, I must admit. So the next slide. Any advice? So I reflected on this about kind of, and Susan touched on this, isn't it? Is about making sure, first of all, that you're going into things with your eyes wide open, isn't it? Really doing your research. What do these jobs involve? What do they really look like? Who can you talk to face to face? Maybe family, friends, or family members that can sort of really give you a true and honest insight into what these careers are like. But when you are there, if you did decide to go into nursing as a career, that you take the time as well to develop some self-awareness, to look at your own values, isn't it? And ask yourself the question, do my values fit with the values of nursing? What actually is nursing in and of itself, isn't it? And if you get there, it's important to stay positive, to find the positives in all of this sort of what can feel at times chaotic environments, isn't it? Where you feel that maybe things are really difficult, that the hours are long and that there's too much to do, and that sometimes you encounter people that are maybe not quite as, I don't want to say challenging, it's not really the right way to frame it, but sometimes things do challenge us, isn't it? So how do we cope with all of that? So it's important to get to know your colleagues, be part of a really strong team, stay positive throughout, try and find the positive thing, and try not to let everything get you down. And to that slide with the blue face is really just to illustrate the importance of your own physical and mental well-being in all of this, because they're long hours where you encounter people at their most vulnerable, and it takes a lot out of you when you displaying all of this kind of compassion towards people, whether it's for their psychological or physical needs, isn't it? Last one, I think, possibly, I'm not sure, I have no idea. Oh, the challenges in the workplace. Yes, the challenges in the workplace, I mean, I can only imagine, but I suspect they're very similar to the challenges that you would encounter in most workplaces, isn't it? It's barriers to our own development, possibly differences in how we regard, isn't it, systems and processes and policies and leadership and management structures and this kind of thing. And it's always really important to, take time to reflect on where you sit in all of this. How do we overcome these challenges? How do we get over these barriers? And sometimes the best way to kind of work that out and problem solving is to talk to your colleagues, isn't it? And sort of try and thrash things out a little bit. And the solutions come through talking. That's what I've normally found over the years. And there will be challenges, as with any sort of career choice, isn't it? And I think the next one is about peaks. It is indeed. So what were the peaks? I think if I was to think about the most fulfilling aspects of the work that I did, it was probably working as part of the Burns Care Camp, which was a camp for young people who had been severely burnt and not so severely burnt in some instances, and we would take them to an outdoor pursuits camp on a yearly basis. And I was heavily involved with the club for many years, and that was extremely rewarding. And seeing how young children would help other young children to overcome all of the difficulties that they had with confidence and sort of scarring and all of the kind of consequences, isn't it, of a burn injury. So that was always really rewarding, spending time with them outside of a hospital environment. So there are opportunities to sort of do things that are in essence nursing or come from nursing, or your involvement as a nurse, but take you outside of that kind of immediate health environment, isn't it, where we see people in a different light and you get to know people on a different level. So that type of thing was always really rewarding, as was then the prison project that I started, where I started to go into prisons to work with staff there primarily, but then got to know lots of the prisoners and things like that. So it's a very varied role. There's certainly lots of different pathways that you can look at under the sort of nursing umbrella. And of course, don't forget, there's children's nursing, learning disabilities nursing, mental health nursing. It just so happens that I chose adult nursing, but within that, have found myself being able to try so many different areas, whether it was ward work, theatre work, ITU work, prison work, and so on and so forth. So if anything, the peaks were those tiny little moments that you have with patients that you've met. None of them were really based on a promotion or something like that. It's always more to do with the people really that I've met over the years. And I think possibly that's the last. Yes, it is. Thank you very much. That's it. Thank you.